Hi there, my name is Robert Mealy. I'm the co-director of Quicksilver, which is a group devoted to the wild and wonderful music of the 17th century. And we are beyond delighted to be coming to Vancouver, one of our favorite cities and one of our favorite audiences to play for. So very happy to be coming there next month. Oh, sure. I'm from the West Coast, a little further down. I grew up in Berkeley, California. And I was a weird kid. I really loved, from a very early age, I was really fascinated with music of the past. Um, I remember when I was about 14, just being transfixed by Machaut, for example, and I got utterly fascinated with his ballades, especially the canonic ones that go backwards and forwards, and made transcriptions of them, did little illuminated books. Um, by high school, I was really, really interested in 17th century and Baroque music, and I think a lot of it probably came down to really three things for me. One was just the pleasure of the sound itself, just the guttiness of the strings, the resonance of the instruments, just the tactile pleasure of playing these instruments and encountering them. I mean, really a real physical relationship with the instrument in a way that wasn't so clear on modern instruments for me. I grew up playing violin. I started harpsichord when I was about 13 as well. So there was the tactile thing. There was the fact that the music was immediately appealing. I think that was really important. That it was dance music. It was beautiful small forms that made sense to me instantly. And I think one of the most important things for me was that it was a place where I I it wasn't that it was a free play zone, but it was an area where had to learn how to read this music, and I had to learn how to read it for myself. And that felt really different from the training I was getting in modern music making, which was much often closer to sort of Russian gymnastics. It was like, learn the triple axel, which is a really good thing to know how to do a triple axel. I mean, I'm still I'm still practicing. But the fact that with especially with 17th century music, you really have there's like nothing on the page, and yet there's everything on the page. And it's just a question of figuring out how to read this the same way you learn how to read a poem, and then making it as bringing it to life as vividly as possible. I played modern violin until I was about 16, and then I really switched to Baroque violin from there. And I haven't really done modern violin since. So it's this funny. I mean, I think there are more people now who have done that same route, but for a long time I was a kind of an outlier, that someone who had just really grown up in the historical performance community. And it was really a community. I mean, that was part of it for me, was that the Bay Area at that time, all the harpsichordists had gone off to study with Gustav Leonhardt, and Philharmonia was just starting to emerge. And it was a really exciting time to be doing that. And there were a lot of really inspiring people to be playing with. I always forget our founding year because we sort of evolved a little bit gradually. We're people we've all known each other for a long time by now. We've worked in many early music groups together. We've all done, especially around the Boston Early Music Festival, all been very involved in that for many years. And doing orchestra things or doing larger projects, we really felt that there was a kinship among this small group. And part of the kinship was that we were all really interested in exploring 17th century music, which is often less less cared for, less loved than its 18th century counterparts. Partially because it really requires a lot of digging and a lot of patience. You got to sit with this music for a while just to figure out what it wants to say, because it's not necessarily evident. But we started playing it around, I think, 2007, 2008. And for a long time, we would sort of get together at music festivals during the summer, and then gradually we emerged into something that was an ongoing touring group. We've done 3 CDs by now, and it's one of the really nice things about the ensemble is that it's the two violins plus bowed bass, gamba or cello, plus harpsichord plus theorbo, and then also these amazing wind instruments. So on this program, we'll have Dominic Teresi playing dulcian, which is just a sensational instrument. It's like the Barry sax of, I mean, it's the early bassoon, but it really occupies the same function in a way as a fabulous saxophone. So especially the way Dominic plays it, it's a really soulful and beautiful and virtuosic instrument. So it's a really colorful combination to be able to bring. It's not just your usual strings, but it has these other elements going on. Names are hard, right? I mean, it's so hard to find something. This we sort of stumbled across this. I partially a lot of it is because the music itself, the 17th century sonata, is really goes through quicksilver changes. It is always changing its mind, changing its mood. It's this very flexible conversation between everyone on stage, and it sort of segues in and out of very different moods, different meters. So that part of it was there, and then also I think part of it was also the idea that Quicksilver is this element that transmutes things, that transforms things, hopefully into gold. Who knows? We're looking for that. We'll find out if it happens. But the idea of transformation and sort of alchemical interest was part of it, because that's such a thing in the 17th century, this idea that everything is in flux, everything is becoming something else, things aren't what they seem. So it seemed a really nice way to kind of set the stage for 17th century music. It's something that's used a lot in by historians to talk about the 17th century as, and I love the term because it's an era that is both it's modern. I mean, it's definitely self uh, it self-consciously avant-garde. It really feels that there's this moment around 1600 where these books start coming out, the new music, they're writing in the stile moderno, the modern style. They're very conscious that this is modern as opposed to old school, as opposed to the Renaissance polyphony, the perfect, arts of that. This is much more radical, and they really consider themselves that way. So they are self-consciously modern, but at the same time, they're early. They're not like us, which is also nice for us to try to remember that we this is music that we are making ourselves, but it is music that is from a very different place. So it's kind of a sort of ethnomusicology of the past that we're always going through to find ways of bringing this very different world to life. That's a really good question. Um, I don't know, one way to think about it might be that the, how knowledge was divided into, well, it's still, the arts and the sciences in universities. So there's the trivium and the quadrivium, the four things and the three things, which is how things were taught in the Middle Ages. The sciences are the four things. There's astronomy, there's oh dang, geometry, mathematics, and music. Music is one of the sciences, right? So music's all about number. It's like the pure music that's of the spheres, and what we're doing down on Earth is like this very pale imitation of the perfection of mystical music that's out there somewhere. And then on the other side, there are the arts, which are rhetoric, logic, and grammar. So it's the things that you are using to persuade and to make yourself eloquent. And I think one way to look at what happens in this early 17th century is that music moves from this sort of number sciencey thing over into discourse, and it becomes much more important to be thinking about music as language. So that, for us, for instrumentalists, is really, really interesting, because we don't have text, we don't have any words to these pieces, and yet we have to make them speak. We know, like, Corelli, a bit later in the 17th century, one of the few things we know about how he taught was, he said, non lo udite parlare, can't you hear it speak? And this idea of a speaking text that we have to find out what it wants to say. So I think they were that was a big shift. You know, sort of usually in music history, we talk about, oh, the invention of the continuo. So suddenly melody is liberated. That's part of it. But I think much more at the soul of this is this idea of music as reflecting your emotions in a very mercurial, quicksilver way, that your emotions are constantly changing and constantly shifting. And the best way we can express that in discourse is through music. That's a really interesting question. Honestly, I think we used to think that all 17th century music is great. You just have to discover it. We did a retreat to a music place called Avaloq, which has these sort of week-long retreats. We took a huge pile of music from libraries around New York, and we read through just tons and tons and tons of 17th century music. And we discovered that actually that's not, there's a lot of not great music as well. but but it's also interesting because some of the pieces from that reading session, you know, we would rate them by, you know, 1 through 5 stars or something like that. Some of them were like, it's okay. And but then we would actually come back to it and live with it a bit more, and suddenly discover that actually it had way more to say to us. Part of that is just the process of being open to listening to what the music wants to do, and trying not to enforce too much of an agenda on it, just to see what is possible there. And at the same time, really to bring out all the dramatic possibilities that are in the music, to make it as vivid as possible. And I think a lot of it, honestly, is because by now it's a group of equals. We're just very, it's a real chamber group. We're all part of the conversation, and we all trust each other a lot. And a lot of this music really involves a lot of spontaneous ornamentation, improvisation, and that is a really cool thing, to be able to trust everyone that will happen in a way that everyone will be there to catch each other. So I think the music is performers' music, and the trick is that you really have to listen closely to it to attend to what it really wants to say. And then when you start to find that, to make it just as eloquent as you can. So it's a kind of two-stage process. I think often you know, we want to be correct. That's a given. We want to try as much as possible to it sounds much better in quarter comma mean tone than it would in a later temperament, for example. And it's much easier. It's just sort of the path of least resistance to be using the tools that were designed for the music. So all those things we're always thinking about, and we're always going back to sources to see what we can figure out more about how to reread these things. But in the end, there's also a kind of house style that we've built up over the years that is our own, you know, our own particular musical language, I think. I mean, honestly, one thing I always find really weird is that in this world we're living of historical performance, it's kind of it's the thing they would never have done, right? They were not interested in the 17th century in playing music of 200 years before. They just weren't. They wanted to play new music. So the fact that we're doing this at all is kind of a interesting proposition. But then also, I just find it really, it's a very, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that we're modern in this, and that we're creating our own version of all of this that is persuasive to us as much as possible. And the other thing that I find very odd is that by now we have, as a group, we have played this music, like Castello, probably longer than anyone played it in the 17th century, which is really strange. Like, you know, it flourished. You bought the copy in 1628, you played it for 5 years, and then something new came along, so you wouldn't do it anymore. But, you know, we're still at it. So it's it's funny, this sort of juxtaposition of modern musical culture with this very vibrant past that is unlike what we have at all today. Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, I know it can sound a little pretentious, but a part of it is also like, people hear these pieces on the program, they're like, wow, that is really cool. I wonder where they found it. And just giving at least a thread. Often these are pieces that we've gone to, there's a number of them that we really have had to reconstruct from original sources, I mean, it's not that hard. It's not like trying to do medieval music, for example. The part books are pretty clear. It's you just have to avoid the obvious errors and figure out some odd corners. But I think one example would be this sonata by Johann Caspar Kerl, who's a South German composer who worked a lot in Vienna. He ends up as the sort of the court organist there. He spent a lot of time in Munich as well doing opera until he had a huge fight with the opera singers there and left town in a fit. But he's known for his masses. Handel actually uses a ton of liberally borrows from Carroll. For example, the Israel in Egypt is a lot based on Carroll's keyboard music. But there are, I think, only about 3 instrumental pieces that we've found from him. And one of those turns up in this really interesting collection that I've been fascinated by since college days. This collection put together by a cleric in Baden-Baden called the Rost manuscript. And this guy in the late 17th century just collected a ton of trio sonatas, a lot that are anonymous, a lot that are attributed. And it's a big collection. And luckily it survives because another music lover, Sébastien de Brossard in Paris, bought the music, brings it to Paris. Brossard leaves the collection to the Paris archives, and that's how it survives today. It's still in the Bibliothèque Nationale, but it's this. It is something that this just happens to be there as just a trio of no particular name, but we knew that we were interested in Carroll, and once we scored it up, it just became clear that it was a really, really gorgeous, heartfelt piece that also, I think one of the appeal for us was that, like many of these sonatas, it's an ensemble sonata, but then there are moments where each person takes a solo. And those solos are very kind of sketched in, that they're like whole notes or half notes. Something happens, and it's kind of a free play zone, and that's really a lovely thing to be working with, because we really can make it different every night when we play it, and that's fantastic. That's a really lovely thing to be doing. I think one of the best things is that we just laugh a lot in rehearsal. I think that's really a fabulous thing, that it's a group that is very we really trust each other and we really have a good time together. And I think that comes across in performance, that we really cherish the chance to be making music with dear friends like this. And that's a rare and that's a very special thing, especially these days. So it's not something to be taken lightly. I mean, by now all of our lives are in the group. We're just so complicated. Julie's directing the program at Case Western. I'm directing the program at historical performance program at Juilliard. Avi's running the music program at Trinity Wall Street. Dominic is playing bassoon with Top Music, and now he's actually one of the artistic directors of Top Music. And David Morris is in constant demand. He's touring all the time, doing really interesting projects up and down the West Coast. So carving out the time to get together is harder and harder, but it's more and more important in a way, just to have this kind of oasis. I always tell my students, it's you as a professional, you'll be living a lot of your life doing really interesting projects that are probably someone else's project. And it's really important to have a musical home that you can come back to. And I think for us, this Quicksilver really is a musical home.